The storm hit the Arizona territory with a fury that matched the violence brewing in Maxwell Xerxes's chest that scorching July afternoon in 1884. He had ridden into Pahrump, Nevada, just 3 days prior, another nameless town in a string of places where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. Maxwell preferred it that way. At 27 years old, he had accumulated enough ghosts to fill a graveyard, and the last thing he needed was folks poking around in his past. The whiskey helped some nights. Other nights, nothing could silence the screaming in his head or wash away the blood he still saw on his hands when he closed his eyes. The saloon had been his refuge until the bartender cut him off an hour ago, insisting he had enough for one afternoon. Maxwell had stumbled out into the oppressive heat, squinting against the bright Nevada sun that seemed determined to punish every living thing beneath it. The sky had been clear then, impossibly blue and stretched tight as a drum across the desert horizon. But weather in the high desert changed faster than a rattlesnake's strike, and Maxwell barely noticed when the first dark clouds began gathering in the distance. He was halfway to the livery stable, intent on checking on his horse, when the wind picked up with startling violence. Dust devils formed in the street, spinning wildly and sending debris flying. The few people who had been brave enough to venture out in the heat scattered for cover as the sky turned an ominous greenish-black. Maxwell looked up, his whiskey-fogged mind slowly registering the danger. This was not just a thunderstorm. This was something biblical. That was when he heard the scream. It cut through the howling wind like a knife, high and terrified. Maxwell's head snapped toward the sound, his hand instinctively going to the revolver at his hip. Through the swirling dust, he could make out a figure struggling against the wind about 50 yards down the street. The person appeared to be caught in the open, holding onto what looked like packages that kept threatening to blow away. Another scream, and this time Maxwell could tell it was a woman. She lost her grip on whatever she had been carrying, and the wind sent boxes tumbling down the street like children's toys. The woman stumbled after them, and that was when Maxwell saw the real danger. A large wagon, improperly secured outside the general store, had broken free from its moorings. The wind was pushing it directly toward her, and she was too focused on her scattered belongings to notice. "Move!" Maxwell shouted, but his voice was lost in the roar of the storm. His legs moved before his mind fully caught up, the alcohol in his system burning away in a surge of adrenaline. He sprinted toward her, his boots pounding against the hard-packed dirt of the street. The sky opened up, and rain began to pour down in sheets so thick he could barely see. Lightning cracked overhead, close enough that he felt the hair on his arms stand up. The wagon was gaining speed, pushed by a wind that had to be 60 miles an hour or more. The woman finally looked up, her face registering shock and terror as she saw the massive vehicle bearing down on her. She froze, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. Maxwell hit her like a locomotive, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her sideways with all his strength. They tumbled together into the muddy street just as the wagon careened past, missing them by inches. He felt the wind of its passage, heard the crash as it slammed into the wall of the building behind them. They rolled several times, Maxwell instinctively cradling her head to protect it from the impact. They came to rest against the boardwalk, Maxwell on his back with the woman sprawled across his chest. Rain pounded down on them, turning the street into a river of mud. Hail began to fall, chunks of ice the size of marbles that stung like hornets. "We need to get inside," Maxwell managed to gasp out, though the wind tried to steal the words from his mouth. The woman nodded against his chest, and Maxwell could feel her trembling. He looked around frantically, trying to get his bearings through the deluge. The nearest building with an open door was the church, its whitewashed walls barely visible through the rain. It was maybe 20 feet away, but it might as well have been 20 miles given the conditions. "Can you run?" he asked, his mouth close to her ear so she could hear him. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steadier than he expected. Maxwell rolled them both over, putting his body between her and the worst of the hail. Then he grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet. The wind immediately tried to knock them down again, but Maxwell leaned into it, half dragging the woman toward the church. His free hand reached for the doorframe, catching it just as another gust threatened to send them sprawling. He shoved her through the opening first, then threw himself inside, using his weight to slam the door shut behind them. The sudden absence of wind and rain was almost shocking. Maxwell leaned against the door, breathing hard, water streaming from his clothes and hair. The woman had collapsed onto the floor a few feet away, equally soaked, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Outside, the storm raged with unrelenting fury. Thunder boomed so loud it rattled the church windows. Through the glass, Maxwell could see debris flying past, shutters torn loose, shingles ripped from roofs. This was not just any storm. This was one of those rare desert tempests that people talked about for years afterward. "Are you hurt?" Maxwell asked, finally turning his attention to the woman he had saved. She looked up at him, and despite the water dripping from her hair and the mud splattered across her dress, Maxwell found himself momentarily speechless. She had striking green eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light filtering through the storm-darkened windows. Her face was heart-shaped, with high cheekbones and a full mouth that trembled slightly as she assessed her own condition. "I do not think so," she said, running her hands over her arms and legs. "Just bruised, I imagine." "I have had worse," Maxwell said automatically, which was true enough. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, wringing water from her long brown hair. It fell nearly to her waist, he realized, though it was currently plastered to her back. Her dress was ruined, covered in mud and torn in several places, but she seemed less concerned about her appearance than about the fact that she was alive. "You saved my life," she said, looking up at him with those remarkable eyes. "That wagon would have killed me." "You should not have been out in this," Maxwell said, more harshly than he intended. The adrenaline was fading and his hands had started to shake. He clenched them into fists, not wanting her to see. "I know that now," she replied, a touch of steel entering her voice. "But the storm came up so quickly. I was just trying to get my purchases back to the boarding house." "Your purchases are halfway to California by now," Maxwell said, moving away from the door to look around the church. It was a simple building with rough wooden pews and a plain altar at the front. No one else appeared to be taking shelter here, which was probably for the best. Maxwell was not in the mood for company beyond the woman he had just rescued. "I suppose they are," she said, and to his surprise, she laughed. It was a slightly hysterical sound, but genuine nonetheless. "Well, Mrs. Pemberton is going to be furious with me." Those were her special order items from San Francisco. Maxwell found himself almost smiling despite the circumstances. Better she is angry about lost packages than planning your funeral. That is true enough. The woman managed to get to her feet, though she swayed slightly. Maxwell reached out instinctively to steady her, his hand catching her elbow. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Maxwell felt something shift inside his chest. It was uncomfortable, like a door being pried open that he had nailed shut long ago. "Thank you," she said softly. "Truly. You risked your life for me." "It was nothing," Maxwell muttered, releasing her elbow and stepping back. The truth was, He had not thought about it at all. He had just moved. Maybe there was still something decent left in him after all, though he doubted it would last past sundown. "It was not nothing," she insisted. "What is your name?" Maxwell hesitated. He had gotten into the habit of using false names in recent years, anything to avoid recognition. But something about this woman, about this moment, made lying feel wrong. "Maxwell Xerxes," he said. "Most people call me Max." "Marlowe Sinclair," she replied, extending her hand like a man would. Maxwell stared at it for a moment before taking it. Her hand was small, but her grip was firm. "Most people call me Marlowe." "Never Marley or Lowe or any of those awful nicknames people try to saddle me with." "Marlowe," Maxwell repeated, and the name felt good in his mouth. "That is unusual. My mother was a romantic," Marlowe said with a slight smile. "She named me after Christopher Marlowe, the playwright. She said if I was going to be born in Nevada territory, I at least deserved a name with some culture attached to it." "Is she here in Pahrump?" Maxwell asked, then immediately regretted the question when he saw Marlowe's expression close off. "She passed when I was 12, Marlowe said quietly. "My father as well. Cholera outbreak in Carson City, where we lived before." "I am sorry," Maxwell said, and meant it. He knew about loss, about the holes people left behind when they died. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the continued roar of the storm outside. Lightning flashed, illuminating the church interior in stark white relief, followed immediately by a crack of thunder so loud that Marlowe flinched. Without thinking, Maxwell moved closer to her, a protective instinct he thought he had lost rising to the surface. "How long do you think it will last?" Marlowe asked, hugging herself against the chill that was setting in. Despite the summer heat, the rain had brought a significant temperature drop, and their wet clothes were not helping matters. "Hard to say," Maxwell replied, studying the storm through the windows. "These desert storms can blow through in minutes or rage for hours. This one looks like it might be settling in for a spell." "Wonderful," Marlowe said with a sigh. She moved toward one of the pews and sat down, smoothing her ruined skirt as if that would somehow make it presentable again. "Mrs. Pemberton really is going to have my hide. I work for her, you see. She runs the boarding house and I help with the cooking and cleaning. The packages I was carrying had some special spices she ordered and several yards of expensive fabric. I cannot possibly afford to replace them." Maxwell studied her as she spoke, noting the worry lines that appeared on her forehead, the way her hands twisted together in her lap. She was young, probably only 21 or 22, but there was a weariness about her that suggested she had seen more than her share of hardship. "Any employer worth a damn would not hold you responsible for an act of God," Maxwell said, leaning against the wall near her pew. His legs felt unsteady, and he realized the whiskey was still working through his system, mixing unpleasantly with the adrenaline crash. "You do not know Mrs. Pemberton," Marlowe said with a weak smile. "She is about as understanding as a hangman's noose, but the work pays regularly, and in this town that is saying something. I cannot afford to lose this position." "What about family?" Maxwell asked. "Anyone who could help if things went south with the boarding house." Marlowe shook her head. "As I said, my parents are gone. I had an aunt in Sacramento, but she passed 2 years ago. It is just me. Just me." The words hung in the air between them, and Maxwell recognized them for what they were, a statement of profound loneliness. He knew that feeling intimately, wore it like a second skin. "What brought you to Pahrump?" Marlowe asked, apparently deciding that turnabout was fair play. "You do not strike me as a miner, and this town does not have much else to offer besides the silver prospects up in the hills." Maxwell considered lying. It would be easy enough to invent some story about drifting through, looking for work, any of the standard excuses. But that strange feeling in his chest was back, the one that made him want to be honest with her. "Running from something," he said finally. "Same as half the men out here, I suppose." Marlowe studied him with those sharp green eyes, and Maxwell had the uncomfortable feeling that she could see right through him, past all the walls and defenses he had built up over the years. "Did you kill someone?" she asked bluntly. "Yes," Maxwell said, because there was no point in denying it. "Several people, actually." He expected her to recoil, to look at him with fear or disgust. Instead, Marlowe just nodded slowly. "Was it during the war?" she asked. Maxwell felt his jaw clench. "Some of it, not all of it. The war." Everyone called it that, as if there had only been one war, as if the civil war that had torn the country apart 20 years ago was the only conflict that mattered. For Maxwell, the war had never really ended. It had just changed shape, become personal instead of political. "I do not need to know the details," Marlowe said after a moment. "But thank you for being honest. Most men would have lied." "Most men are smarter than me," Maxwell said with a bitter laugh. Another flash of lightning, another roll of thunder. The rain showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be falling harder, drumming against the church roof like 1,000 desperate fingers seeking entrance. "Are you cold?" Maxwell asked, noticing that Marlowe had started shivering more noticeably. "A bit," she admitted. "My dress is soaked through, and it is getting colder in here." Maxwell looked around the church, hoping to find something they could use to warm up. There was no fireplace, no stove, nothing that would provide heat. But near the altar, he spotted a trunk. He walked over and opened it, finding what he hoped for. Several folded blankets that were probably used for church socials or emergency situations exactly like this one. He brought 2 back to Marlowe, handing her one. "It is not much, but it should help." "Thank you," Marlowe said gratefully, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. Despite her modesty, Maxwell could not help but notice the way her wet dress clung to her frame, outlining curves that made his mouth go dry. He looked away quickly, angry at himself. She had nearly died, and here he was noticing her body like some kind of animal. "You can turn around," Marlowe said after a moment, amusement coloring her voice. "I am quite thoroughly covered now." Maxwell turned back, relieved to see that she had indeed wrapped the blanket around herself like a cocoon, hiding the transparent quality of her wet clothing. She patted the pew beside her. "Sit down before you fall down," she said. "You look like you are about to pass out." Maxwell wanted to argue, but she was right. His head was pounding, his legs felt like water, and the room had started to spin slightly around the edges. He sat down heavily on the pew, keeping a respectful distance between them despite the voice in his head that wanted him to move closer, to feel the warmth of another human being after months of isolation. "How much did you drink today?" Marlowe asked, not accusingly, just curious. "Enough to forget," Maxwell said. "Not enough, apparently, since I still remember everything I want to forget." "Is that why you drink?" Marlowe asked. "To forget? Is there any other reason?" Maxwell countered. Marlowe was quiet for a moment, considering. "My father drank to forget too toward the end, after my mother died. He said it was the only thing that made the pain bearable." "Did it work?" Maxwell asked. "No," Marlowe said softly. "It just made him slower and sadder until the cholera took him too. I think part of him was relieved to go, to be with her again." Maxwell closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the pew. "I am sorry. That is a terrible thing for a child to witness." "I was 14, Marlowe said. "Old enough to understand, but young enough to be terrified of what would happen to me. I ended up in an orphanage in Carson City for a few years, until I was old enough to work and strike out on my own." "That must have been hard," Maxwell said. It was survival, Marlowe replied pragmatically. We do what we must to keep going. You know that as well as I do, I think. She was right, of course. Maxwell had been surviving for years now, ever since he lost everything that mattered to him. Surviving was not the same as living, but it was what he knew how to do. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Despite everything, Maxwell found the moment oddly peaceful. There was something about Marlowe's presence that calmed the constant restlessness that usually plagued him. Maybe it was the whiskey finally wearing off, or maybe it was something else, something he did not want to examine too closely. "Tell me something true," Marlowe said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Something you have never told anyone else." Maxwell opened his eyes and looked at her. She was watching him intently, her green eyes soft with something that might have been understanding or might have been pity. He did not want her pity, but that look in her eyes made him want to give her what she asked for anyway. "I do not know how to stop being angry," Maxwell said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Every day I wake up and the rage is right there, burning in my chest like I swallowed hot coals. Sometimes I think if I could just let it out, scream or hit something or burn the whole world down, maybe it would finally go away. But I know it would not. The anger is not about anything outside me. It is about me, about the things I have done, about the man I have become." Marlowe reached out and took his hand. Her skin was cool and soft, and the simple touch sent a shock through Maxwell's entire body. "You saved my life today," she said quietly. "A man who was truly lost, truly beyond redemption, would not have done that. You could have kept walking. No one would have blamed you, not in a storm like that. But you did not. You ran toward danger to help someone you did not even know. That anger you feel. Maybe it is not about who you are now. Maybe it is about who you used to be, and you are fighting to become someone different." Maxwell wanted to pull his hand away, to reject her words, to tell her she was wrong. But he could not. Because somewhere deep inside, in a place he had thought long dead, her words resonated. Maybe she was right. Maybe the anger and the drinking and the running were all just ways of punishing himself for his past, of refusing to believe he could be anything other than the monster he had been. "I killed my best friend," Maxwell heard himself say. The words tumbled out like stones down a hillside, and once they started, he could not stop them. "His name was Jacob. We grew up together, fought in the war together, came west together. He was like a brother to me, and I killed him." Marlowe did not let go of his hand. She did not pull away or gasp in horror. She just held on and listened. "It was 3 years ago in a town called Bitter Creek up in Wyoming Territory. We were working as ranch hands, trying to make enough money to buy our own land someday. There was a woman, Sarah. I thought I loved her. I thought she loved me. But she was seeing Jacob too, playing us both for fools. When I found out, when I saw them together, I lost my mind. I challenged him to draw on me. He did not want to fight. He tried to talk me down, tried to explain, but I would not listen. I shot him dead in the middle of Main Street while half the town watched. The memory was as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. Jacob falling, the shock on his face, the blood spreading across his shirt. Sarah screaming, the sheriff coming, Maxwell running. They tried me in absentia," Maxwell continued. "Found me guilty of murder. There is a warrant out for my arrest, a price on my head. I have been running ever since, moving from town to town, never staying long enough for anyone to recognize me or ask too many questions. And every night I see Jacob's face. Every night I hear him calling my name, asking me why. Why did you shoot him?" Marlowe asked softly. "Really?" Maxwell had asked himself that question 1,000 times. "Because I was angry, because I felt betrayed. Because shooting him was easier than admitting that maybe Sarah never really loved either of us, that maybe the war had broken something inside me and I did not know how to feel anything except rage anymore. "And now?" Marlowe asked. "What do you feel now?" "Guilt," Maxwell said. "Every goddamn day. Guilt so heavy I can barely breathe under the weight of it. And anger still, always. Anger at myself, at Jacob for dying, at Sarah for lying, at the whole world for being such a cruel place." Marlowe was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father told me something once before the drinking got too bad. He said that carrying guilt was like carrying a heavy stone. You could hold on to it forever, let it weigh you down and break your back. Or you could set it down and walk away. Not forget about it, not pretend it never existed, but just stop carrying it with you every step of every day." "I do not know how to set it down," Maxwell said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words. "Maybe you start by forgiving yourself," Marlowe said. "Maybe you start by believing that one terrible moment does not define your entire life. You made a mistake. A horrible, irreversible mistake. But you are still here. You still have time to be someone different, to do something good with whatever years you have left." "Like saving foolish women from runaway wagons?" Maxwell asked, and despite everything, there was a ghost of humor in his voice. "Exactly like that," Marlowe said, and she smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes and made something warm bloom in Maxwell's chest. They stayed like that, hands clasped, the storm raging outside while they sat in the quiet church. Maxwell felt something shifting inside him like ice breaking up on a frozen river. The anger was still there, the guilt was still there, but they felt smaller somehow, less overwhelming. Less like they were the only things defining him. "Tell me something true," Maxwell said, echoing her earlier words. "Something you have never told anyone else." Marlowe looked down at their joined hands. "I am afraid," she said. "Every single day. I am terrified that I will end up like my father, that the loneliness and the struggle will break me and I will just give up. I work at the boarding house and I smile and I am polite and I do everything I am supposed to do, but inside, I feel like I am drowning. Like I am just waiting for the day when I cannot keep my head above water anymore." Her honesty gutted him. Maxwell squeezed her hand. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "You survived losing your parents. You survived the orphanage. You are making your own way in a world that does not make anything easy for women on their own. That takes courage." "It does not feel like courage," Marlowe said. "It feels like desperation." "Maybe they are the same thing," Maxwell replied. "Maybe courage is just desperation that refuses to quit." Marlowe looked up at him, and there was something new in her eyes now, something soft and vulnerable that made Maxwell's heart race. "I am glad you were drunk in the street today," she said. "I am glad you heard me scream. I am glad you were there." "So am I," Maxwell said, and he meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. The storm outside began to lessen gradually, the thunder moving further away, the rain becoming less intense. But neither Maxwell nor Marlowe moved from their spot on the pew. They sat together, hands still clasped, as the worst of the tempest passed over Pahrump. When the rain finally stopped about 2 hours later, leaving behind a town washed clean but littered with debris, they reluctantly stood and prepared to face the outside world again. Marlowe returned her blanket to the trunk, though her dress was still far from dry. Maxwell wrapped his own blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. "Keep it," he said when she tried to protest. "You need it more than the church does." They stepped out into the late afternoon light, and the transformation was remarkable. The sky had cleared to a brilliant blue, and everything sparkled with moisture. The air smelled fresh and clean, like the desert had been given new life. But the damage was significant. Roofs had been torn away, windows shattered. The street was littered with debris and fallen timber. People were emerging from buildings, assessing the damage, calling out to neighbors to make sure everyone was accounted for. Maxwell spotted the wagon that had nearly killed Marlowe, now lying on its side against the general store, its bed shattered. "I should get back to the boarding house," Marlowe said reluctantly. "Face Mrs. Pemberton and whatever wrath awaits me." "I will walk with you," Maxwell said, surprising himself with the offer. Marlowe smiled. "I would like that." They walked slowly through the damaged town, navigating around puddles and debris. People stared at them, at the muddy stranger and the soaked boarding house girl, but Maxwell found he did not care. Let them stare. Let them wonder. For the first time in 3 years, he felt almost human again. The boarding house was on the far edge of town, a 2-story structure that had weathered the storm better than most buildings. As they approached, a stout woman came rushing out, her face red with anger and worry. "Marlowe Sinclair, where have you been?" the woman demanded. This had to be Mrs. Pemberton. "I have been worried sick, and where are my packages? Do not tell me you lost them in this storm." "I am sorry, Mrs. Pemberton," Marlowe said, her voice steady despite the situation. "The storm came up so quickly and the packages were lost, but I am safe, thanks to this gentleman. Mr. Xerxes saved my life." Mrs. Pemberton's angry expression faltered as she took in their bedraggled appearance, the mud covering them both, the church blanket around Marlowe's shoulders. "What happened?" she asked, her tone shifting from anger to concern. Maxwell explained about the runaway wagon, about taking shelter in the church. Mrs. Pemberton listened, her hand going to her mouth as the story unfolded. When he finished, she looked at him with new respect. "Then I owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Xerxes," she said. "Marlowe is like a daughter to me, for all that I am hard on her sometimes. If you had not been there—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Anyone would have done the same," Maxwell said, though he knew that was not true. "Come inside, both of you, Mrs. Pemberton said, already herding them toward the door. "You need dry clothes and hot food. Marlowe, help Mr. Xerxes get settled in the parlor while I put together something to eat." "That is not necessary," Maxwell started to protest, but Mrs. Pemberton cut him off with a sharp look. "Young man, I do not know where you come from or what brings you to Pahrump, and I do not care. You saved this girl's life, and in my book, that earns you a meal and a warm place to sit. Now stop arguing and get inside before you both catch your death of cold." Maxwell found himself ushered into a comfortable parlor with worn but clean furniture. Marlowe disappeared upstairs to change, and Mrs. Pemberton brought him a towel and a blanket. "Dry off as best you can," she instructed. "Your clothes will need washing, but that can wait until after you have eaten." She bustled off to the kitchen, leaving Maxwell alone in the quiet parlor. He dried his face and hair, feeling oddly at peace despite being in a stranger's home. Through the doorway, he could hear Mrs. Pemberton moving about in the kitchen, the homey sounds of cooking and preparation. It had been so long since he had been in a place like this, a real home with warmth and care, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like. Marlowe came back downstairs wearing a simple gray dress, her long hair braided and still damp, but much cleaner. She looked beautiful in a quiet, understated way that made Maxwell's chest tighten. "Mrs. Pemberton is bringing stew," she said, sitting down in the chair across from him. "She makes the best stew in Nevada, I swear. You are in for a treat." "You do not have to entertain me," Maxwell said. "I am sure you have work to do." "Actually, Mrs. Pemberton told me to keep you company," Marlowe said with a slight smile. "She said she would handle dinner preparations herself tonight, which is practically unheard of. I think you impressed her." "I did not do anything special," Maxwell insisted, uncomfortable with the praise. "You keep saying that," Marlowe observed. "But you did. You risked your life for mine. That is special, whether you want to admit it or not." Before Maxwell could respond, Mrs. Pemberton returned with 2 bowls of steaming stew and thick slices of bread. The smell alone made Maxwell's stomach growl, reminding him that he had not eaten anything substantial since the previous day. "Eat up," Mrs. Pemberton commanded. "Both of you, and Mr. Xerxes, after you finish, I want to offer you a room here for the night, free of charge. It is the least I can do." Maxwell opened his mouth to refuse, but Marlowe caught his eye and gave him a pleading look. "Please," she said softly. "Let someone do something nice for you." So Maxwell stayed. He ate the best stew he had tasted in years, warm and rich and filled with tender meat and vegetables. He let Mrs. Pemberton show him to a small but comfortable room on the 2nd floor, with a real bed and clean sheets. And when she left him alone to rest, he lay down and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, the nightmares did not come. He woke to early evening light filtering through the curtains and the sound of voices downstairs. For a disorienting moment, Maxwell did not remember where he was. Then it all came back. The storm, Marlowe, the church, everything. He sat up slowly, noting that someone had brought his clothes in while he slept, cleaned and dried and folded neatly on the dresser. Maxwell changed quickly, running his fingers through his hair in a futile attempt to make himself presentable. When he came downstairs, he found the dining room filled with boarders eating dinner. Marlowe spotted him and waved him over to an empty seat at the long table. "You slept through the afternoon," she said as he sat down. "Mrs. Pemberton said to let you rest. How do you feel?" "Better," Maxwell admitted. "Much better, actually." Dinner was a lively affair, with the boarders all talking about the storm and the damage it had caused. Maxwell learned that several buildings in town had been severely damaged, including part of the saloon roof. 2 people had been injured by flying debris, but miraculously, no one had been killed. The conversation inevitably turned to Maxwell's rescue of Marlowe, and he found himself the subject of grateful toasts and earnest thanks from people he had never met. It was uncomfortable and overwhelming, but also strangely nice. These people saw him as a hero, as someone good and brave. They did not know about Jacob, about the warrant, about any of the darkness that defined his past. To them, he was just Maxwell Xerxes, the stranger who saved their friend. After dinner, as the boarders dispersed to their rooms or the parlor, Marlowe touched his arm. "Walk with me," she asked. The town should be beautiful after the rain. Maxwell knew he should say no, should make his excuses and leave before he got too comfortable here, too attached to this place and this woman. But he found himself nodding anyway, following her out into the cool evening air. Pahrump after the storm was indeed beautiful. The setting sun painted everything gold and pink, and the wet surfaces reflected the light like mirrors. They walked slowly down the main street, taking in the cleanup efforts that were already underway. The resilience of the people impressed Maxwell. They had been battered by nature, but they were already rebuilding, already moving forward. "Tell me about the war," Marlowe said as they walked. "What was it like?" Maxwell was quiet for a long moment. "It was hell," he said finally. "People talk about glory and honor, but there was none of that. Just blood and death and boys crying for their mothers as they died in the mud. I joined up when I was 17, thought I was going to be a hero. I came home 4 years later barely recognizing the face in the mirror." "Which side?" Marlowe asked. "Union," Maxwell said. "My father was an abolitionist, believed slavery was a sin against God and man. I believed it too, still do. But knowing you are fighting for a just cause does not make killing any easier, does not make the nightmares stop." "Is that when the anger started?" Marlowe asked gently. Maxwell considered the question. "Maybe. Or maybe it just gave me permission to let it out. I was always a head-headed kid, quick to fight, quick to take offense. The war taught me how to channel that into violence, how to be efficient at killing. Then when it was over, I did not know how to turn it off, did not know how to be anything except a soldier. They had reached the edge of town, where the desert stretched out vast and beautiful under the evening sky. Marlowe led him to a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding landscape, still glistening with moisture from the storm. "You ever think about going back?" she asked. "To wherever you came from, to face what happened with Jacob?" "Every day," Maxwell admitted, "but I am a coward. I ran and I keep running, because facing it means facing the truth about who I am, means probably hanging for what I did. Or maybe it means finally being free," Marlowe said. "Maybe the only way to stop running is to turn around and face what is chasing you. When did you become so wise?" Maxwell asked, and there was no sarcasm in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "I am not wise," Marlowe said with a sad smile. "I am just someone who knows what it is like to be trapped by circumstances, to feel like you do not have any choices. But I also know that every day we make choices, small ones that add up to define who we are. You chose to save me today. That was a choice. You could choose to forgive yourself. That is a choice too." Maxwell reached out and took her hand, the gesture feeling natural now after their time in the church. "You are remarkable, Marlowe Sinclair. You know that?" She turned to look at him, and the last rays of sunlight caught in her green eyes, making them glow. "You are not so bad yourself, Maxwell Xerxes, despite what you think about yourself." They stood there on the rise, hands clasped, as the sun finished setting and the stars began to emerge. Maxwell felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, something that might have been hope. This woman, this brave, honest, broken and healing woman, saw something in him worth saving. Maybe she was wrong, or maybe, just maybe, she was right. "I should probably move on tomorrow," Maxwell said, though the words felt hollow. "I have stayed in one place too long already." "Or you could stay a little longer," Marlowe said, her voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Pemberton mentioned she could use someone to help with repairs around the boarding house. The storm damaged the barn roof, and several of the shutters need replacing. She would pay fair wages, plus room and board." "Marlowe," Maxwell said, his voice pained, "you do not know what you are asking. Getting close to me is dangerous. Someone might recognize me. Someone might come looking for me. I do not want to put you or Mrs. Pemberton at risk." "Let me worry about that," Marlowe said firmly. "Stay, Maxwell. At least for a little while. Let yourself rest. Let yourself just be somewhere without running." Maxwell knew he should refuse. Every instinct told him to leave Pahrump tonight, to put as much distance as possible between himself and this woman who was making him feel things he had no right to feel. But those green eyes were looking at him with such hope, such faith, that he found his resolve crumbling. "1 week," he heard himself say. "I will stay 1 week to help with the repairs, but then I have to move on." Marlowe's face lit up with a smile that took his breath away. "1 week," she agreed. "We will see what happens after that." That 1 week stretched into 2, then 3. Maxwell found himself settling into a routine at the boarding house, fixing what the storm had damaged and generally making himself useful. Mrs. Pemberton turned out to be a generous employer with a heart bigger than her gruff exterior suggested. She asked no questions about his past and paid him fairly for his work. But it was Marlowe who kept him there, if he was being honest with himself. They fell into a pattern of spending evenings together, walking through town or sitting on the boarding house porch, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her childhood in Carson City, about her dreams of someday opening her own restaurant. He told her about growing up in Ohio, about his mother who had died when he was young, about Jacob before everything went wrong. With each passing day, Maxwell felt the walls around his heart crumbling a little more. The constant anger that had been his companion for so long began to fade, replaced by something softer, something that felt dangerously like happiness. He started to sleep through the nights without nightmares. Started to imagine what it might be like to stay in one place, to build a life instead of running from one. It terrified him. One evening about a month after the storm, Maxwell was finishing up repairs on the barn when Marlowe came out carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. The summer heat had returned with a vengeance after the storm's brief respite, and Maxwell was drenched with sweat. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cold glass gratefully and draining half of it in one long swallow. Marlowe laughed. "Easy there, or you will give yourself a headache." Maxwell grinned at her and realized with a start that he could not remember the last time he had smiled so naturally, so genuinely. "Worth it," he said. They sat together on a bench outside the barn, watching the sun start its descent toward the horizon. This had become their time, these quiet evening moments when the day's work was done and they could just be together. "Mrs. Pemberton asked me something today," Marlowe said after a while. "She asked if you and I were courting." Maxwell's heart jumped into his throat. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was not sure," Marlowe said, turning to look at him. "Are we, Maxwell, courting, I mean?" This was dangerous territory. Maxwell knew he should make a joke, deflect, change the subject. Instead, he found himself saying, "I would like to be, if that is something you want to." "It is," Marlowe said softly. "I have wanted to say something for weeks now, but I was not sure if you felt the same way." "Marlowe, I feel more for you than I have any right to feel," Maxwell said, setting down his lemonade so he could take her hands in his. "You have given me something I thought I lost forever. You have given me peace. But you need to understand what you would be getting into. I am a wanted man. There is always a chance that someone will recognize me, that the law will catch up with me. I could not bear it if you got hurt because of me." "I am not afraid," Marlowe said, and her voice was steady and sure. "I know the risks, Maxwell. I know who you are and what you have done. And I choose you anyway. I choose this. Whatever comes, we will face it together." Maxwell felt something break open inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 3 long years. Before he could think better of it, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, a question more than a statement. But when Marlowe kissed him back, her hands coming up to cup his face, it became something more. It became a promise. They pulled apart eventually, both breathing hard. Marlowe's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "Well," she said with a shaky laugh, "I suppose that answers Mrs. Pemberton's question." "I suppose it does," Maxwell agreed, unable to stop smiling. "Marlowe Sinclair, would you do me the honor of officially courting you?" "I would be delighted, Maxwell Xerxes," Marlowe said and kissed him again. The next few months were the happiest of Maxwell's life. He and Marlowe courted properly, with chaperoned walks and dinners under Mrs. Pemberton's watchful eye. The whole town seemed to approve of the match, pleased that their local hero had found happiness with one of their own. Maxwell took a job at the livery stable, using his skills with horses to earn a steady income. He was good with animals, patient and calm in a way he had never managed to be with people before. The work was honest and satisfying, and for the first time since the war, Maxwell felt like he was building something instead of running away. But in the quiet moments, usually late at night when he could not sleep, the fear would creep back in. Fear that this was all temporary, that his past would catch up with him and destroy everything he had found here. Fear that he did not deserve this happiness, that he was somehow betraying Jacob's memory by moving on with his life. Marlowe seemed to sense his struggles even when he did not voice them. She had a way of grounding him, of pulling him back from the dark places his mind wanted to wander. She would take his hand or lean her head on his shoulder, simple touches that reminded him he was not alone anymore. It was late October when everything came to a head. Maxwell was at the livery stable, mucking out stalls, when a stranger rode into town. There was nothing particularly remarkable about the man, just another drifter passing through. But something about him set Maxwell's nerves on edge, some instinct developed from years of looking over his shoulder. The man went into the saloon, and Maxwell tried to dismiss his unease as paranoia. But an hour later, when the stranger emerged and headed directly for the livery stable, Maxwell knew his time had run out. "You are Maxwell Xerxes," the man said. It was not a question. Maxwell straightened slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the revolver he still wore at his hip. "Who is asking?" "Name's Thomas Grant," the man said. "I am a bounty hunter out of Wyoming territory. There is a warrant for your arrest for the murder of Jacob Mitchell, dead or alive, though I prefer alive. More money that way." Maxwell's world narrowed to the man in front of him, to the revolver visible under his coat. "I am not going back there," he said quietly. "I cannot." "You do not have a choice," Grant said. "You can come peacefully or we can do this the hard way. Makes no difference to me either way." Maxwell's hand tightened on the grip of his revolver. For a moment, he considered drawing, considered fighting his way out like he had done before in other towns when recognition came too close. But that was the old Maxwell, the angry, running Maxwell, the man who solved every problem with violence. He thought about Marlowe, about the life they were building together, about the promise she had made that they would face everything together. This was his chance to finally stop running, to face what he had done and accept the consequences. Maybe it would mean hanging. Or maybe there was another way, some path forward he could not see yet. Maxwell's hand fell away from his revolver. "Give me one day," he said. "One day to set my affairs in order, to say goodbye to someone. Then I will go with you peacefully." Grant studied him suspiciously. "How do I know you will not run?" "You do not," Maxwell admitted. "But I give you my word. One day and then I will surrender to you. You can shadow me if you do not trust me, but please just give me this." Something in Maxwell's face must have convinced Grant, because after a long moment he nodded. 24 hours, he said. "But I will be watching. You try to run, I will shoot you down without hesitation." "Understood," Maxwell said. He found Marlowe in the boarding house kitchen helping Mrs. Pemberton prepare dinner. The moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. She made an excuse to Mrs. Pemberton and pulled him into the parlor. "What happened?" she asked, taking his hands. Maxwell told her everything about the bounty hunter, about the choice he had made to stop running. As he spoke, he watched her face, waiting for the moment when she realized what this meant, when she understood that he was probably going to die at the end of a rope in Wyoming. But Marlowe did not cry or panic. Instead, her expression became determined. "Then we will find a way to fix this," she said firmly. "There has to be something we can do." "Marlowe, I killed a man," Maxwell said. "There is no fixing that." "But there might be extenuating circumstances," Marlowe insisted. "Was there a trial? Were there witnesses who could testify about what happened?" "There was a trial, but I was not there," Maxwell said. "They convicted me in absentia based on witness statements. And yes, there were plenty of witnesses. Half the town saw me shoot Jacob. But did anyone testify about why?" Marlowe pressed. "Did anyone explain that he drew first, that it was self-defense?" Maxwell shook his head. "It was not self-defense. I challenged him. I forced the confrontation. And even if he drew first, I was the one who created the situation. The law is pretty clear on that." Marlowe was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "We need to go to Bitter Creek. We need to go back to where it happened and find out exactly what the situation is. Maybe there is something, some legal avenue we have not considered, but we cannot do anything from here." Maxwell asked. "Marlowe, no, I am not dragging you into this." "You are not dragging me anywhere," Marlowe said fiercely. "I am choosing to come with you. I told you, Maxwell. Whatever comes, we face it together. I meant that, Mrs. Pemberton needs you here," Maxwell said desperately, grasping for any argument that might make her stay safe in Pahrump. "Mrs. Pemberton will understand," Marlowe said. "And if she does not, well, I will find other work when we return. This is more important." "If we return," Maxwell corrected quietly. "Marlowe, there is a very good chance I will hang when I get to Bitter Creek. I need you to understand that." "Then we will make sure that does not happen," Marlowe said with absolute conviction. "I am not losing you, Maxwell Xerxes. Not to a rope, not to your past, not to anything. Do you understand me?" Maxwell pulled her into his arms, holding her close and breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know I have no right to say that, no right to love you, but I do. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "You have every right," Marlowe said, her voice muffled against his chest. "And I love you too, which is why we are going to fix this." They spent the rest of the day making plans. Mrs. Pemberton was shocked when they explained the situation, but true to Marlowe's prediction, she was understanding. She even helped them pack supplies for the journey and gave them money from her own savings to help with expenses. "You bring our girl back safe," Mrs. Pemberton said to Maxwell as they prepared to leave the next morning. The bounty hunter, Grant, was waiting outside with the horses. "And you," she said to Marlowe, "you be careful. The world is not kind to women traveling without proper protection." "I will have Maxwell," Marlowe said. "That is all the protection I need." They rode out of Pahrump as the sun was rising, heading northeast toward Wyoming territory. It was a journey that would take weeks, through some of the harshest terrain the West had to offer. Grant rode ahead of them, keeping watch to make sure Maxwell did not try to escape, but he seemed content to let them travel together as long as Maxwell honored his word. The journey was grueling. They crossed deserts and mountains, forded rivers, and navigated narrow canyon passes. At night, they camped under the stars, and Maxwell held Marlowe close, trying to memorize every detail of these moments in case they were all he had left. During the long days in the saddle, they talked about everything. About the future they wanted to build together, about the restaurant Marlowe dreamed of opening, about the ranch Maxwell had once imagined owning with Jacob. They made plans knowing those plans might never come to fruition, but making them anyway because hope was all they had. Grant proved to be less hostile than Maxwell had expected. On the third night of their journey, he sat down by their campfire and accepted a cup of coffee from Marlowe. "I have been doing this job for 10 years, Grant said, staring into the flames. "Hunting men for money. You are the first one who ever gave himself up voluntarily, who ever asked for time to say goodbye instead of drawing on me." "I am tired of running," Maxwell said simply. "Tired of being afraid all the time. Whatever happens in Bitter Creek, at least it will be over." "Maybe it does not have to end the way you think," Grant said. "I have seen cases where a judge showed mercy, where circumstances mattered. I cannot make any promises, but I will speak for you when we get there. Tell them you came peacefully, that you showed remorse. It might not save you, but it could not hurt." "Why would you do that?" Maxwell asked, surprised. Grant shrugged. "Like I said, you are different from most of the men I hunt. Most of them are animals, killers without conscience. You made a mistake in anger, but you are trying to be better. That counts for something in my book." They reached Bitter Creek in late November. The town looked exactly as Maxwell remembered it, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a muddy main street. The sight of it made Maxwell's stomach churn with a mixture of fear and grief. This was where he had killed his best friend. This was where his life had fallen apart. Grant took them directly to the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a grizzled man named Garrett, looked up from his desk in surprise when they walked in. "Maxwell Xerxes," Garrett said, standing up. "I did not think I would ever see you again." "I am here to face what I did," Maxwell said. "I am turning myself in." Garrett looked at Grant, who nodded confirmation. "He came peacefully," Grant said, "gave himself up voluntarily back in Nevada. I am claiming the bounty, but I wanted you to know he did not fight." Garrett studied Maxwell for a long moment. "You are going to have to go in a cell," he said. "But given that you turned yourself in, I will try to get the judge here as quick as possible to hear your case. Might take a week or two." "I understand," Maxwell said. He turned to Marlowe, taking her hands. "You should find a hotel, somewhere safe to stay." "I am not leaving you," Marlowe said stubbornly. "Marlowe, please," Maxwell said. "I need to know you are safe and cared for. I cannot focus on what is coming if I am worried about you." Reluctantly, Marlowe agreed. She kissed him goodbye, a brief touch of lips that carried all the love and fear she was feeling. Then she left with Grant, who had offered to help her find suitable lodging. Alone in the cell, Maxwell had too much time to think. He paced the small space, memories of Jacob flooding back with painful clarity. They had been so young when they met, just boys really. They had survived a war together, dreamed together, built a friendship that Maxwell had thought would last a lifetime, and then he had destroyed it all in a moment of rage and jealousy. Had not even given Jacob a chance to explain, to defend himself. Just drawn and fired, ending a life that had been as precious as his own. The weight of that guilt settled on Maxwell's shoulders like a physical thing. Maybe he did deserve to hang. Maybe that was the only justice for what he had done. But then he thought about Marlowe, about the life they could have together if he survived this. About the man she believed he could be, the man she saw beneath all the anger and guilt. Maybe he owed it to her and to Jacob's memory to fight for that possibility. Marlowe visited him every day, bringing food and clean clothes and, most importantly, her presence. She had been investigating, talking to people who had witnessed the shooting, trying to understand exactly what had happened that day 3 years ago. "Sarah is still here," Marlowe told him on her third visit. "The woman you both loved, I spoke with her." Maxwell tensed. "What did she say?" "She said she never meant for anyone to get hurt," Marlowe said. "She said she was young and foolish and liked the attention from both of you. She never thought it would end the way it did. She has been carrying guilt about it ever since." "It was not her fault," Maxwell said. "It was mine. I was the one who pulled the trigger." "But there is more," Marlowe continued. "I found 3 witnesses who all say that Jacob drew first. They said you challenged him, yes, but he was the one who actually went for his gun before you did. They tried to testify to that at the trial, but the prosecutor dismissed it, said it did not matter because you forced the confrontation." "It does not matter," Maxwell said. "I created the situation. Under the law, that makes me responsible." "But it matters for context," Marlowe insisted. "It matters because it shows you did not just murder Jacob in cold blood. There was a confrontation, emotions were high, and he drew first. A good lawyer could argue that down from murder to manslaughter, maybe even get the sentence reduced." Maxwell wanted to hope, but he was afraid to. "We do not have money for a good lawyer, Marlowe." "Actually, we do," Marlowe said with a small smile. "Mrs. Pemberton wired money. And Sarah contributed as well. She feels terrible about what happened and wants to help make it right. There is a lawyer in Cheyenne who has agreed to come defend you. His name is Robert Morrison, and Grant says he is very good." Why is everyone helping me? Maxwell asked, overwhelmed. I do not deserve this. Yes, you do, Marlowe said firmly. You made a terrible mistake, but you are not a monster. Everyone can see that. They want to help because they believe you deserve a second chance. The trial took place 2 weeks later in the Bitter Creek courthouse. The room was packed with curious townspeople, many of whom remembered Maxwell and Jacob from their time working in the area. Maxwell sat at the defense table with Morrison, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s who exuded confidence. The prosecutor presented his case. Maxwell had challenged Jacob Mitchell to a gunfight over a woman, and Jacob had died as a result. Several witnesses testified to seeing the shooting, describing how Jacob had fallen in the street and died within minutes. Then Morrison began the defense. He called the witnesses Marlowe had found, the ones who testified that Jacob had drawn first. He called Sarah to the stand, and she tearfully explained the situation between the three of them, how she had been leading both men on, how she regretted her actions. Morrison painted a picture of two friends, both traumatized by war, both competing for the affection of a woman, both making bad choices in a moment of high emotion. He argued that while Maxwell's actions were wrong, they did not constitute premeditated murder. He pointed out that Maxwell had turned himself in, had shown genuine remorse, had been living a peaceful life in Nevada before voluntarily returning to face justice. Finally, Morrison called Maxwell to the stand. Maxwell told his story honestly, holding nothing back. He described his friendship with Jacob, his feelings for Sarah, the moment when he saw them together and something inside him broke. He talked about the challenge, about the way Jacob had tried to calm him down, about the horrifying moment when he realized what he had done. I think about Jacob every day, Maxwell said, his voice breaking. He was my brother in every way that mattered. I loved him and I killed him, and there is not a day that goes by when I do not wish I could take it back. I cannot bring him back. I cannot undo what I did. But I can try to live the rest of my life in a way that honors his memory. I can try to be the man he would have wanted me to be. The courtroom was silent when he finished. Several women were crying, and even the judge looked moved. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Maxwell spent that time in his cell, alternating between hope and despair. Marlowe stayed close, visiting as often as the sheriff would allow, her presence a lifeline keeping him from drowning in fear. When the verdict finally came, Maxwell was led back into the courtroom in chains. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. Marlowe sat in the front row, her hands clasped in prayer. The foreman of the jury stood. In the matter of the territory of Wyoming versus Maxwell Xerxes on the charge of murder, we find the defendant guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Maxwell felt his knees go weak with relief. Manslaughter, not murder. It meant a prison sentence instead of a noose. The judge banged his gavel for silence. Maxwell Xerxes, you have been found guilty of manslaughter in the death of Jacob Mitchell. Before I pass sentence, do you have anything you wish to say? Maxwell stood, forcing himself to speak clearly despite the emotion choking him. Your Honor, I am grateful for the mercy this jury has shown me. I do not deserve it, but I swear I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. I will honor Jacob's memory by being a better man than I was when I killed him. The judge nodded. I am sentencing you to 5 years in the territorial prison at Laramie. However, given that you turned yourself in voluntarily and have shown genuine remorse, and given the testimony about your character from multiple witnesses, I am suspending 3 years of that sentence. You will serve 2 years, after which you will be released on parole for 3 years. During that parole period, you will check in monthly with a designated officer and stay out of trouble. You understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maxwell managed to say. "Thank you." As the bailiff led him away, Maxwell caught Marlowe's eye. She was crying, but she was smiling too. 2 years. Just 2 years, and then they could start their life together. It was not perfect, but it was so much more than he had dared to hope for. The 2 years in Laramie prison were the longest of Maxwell's life. The conditions were harsh, the work brutal, but he endured it because he had something to live for now. Marlowe wrote to him every week without fail, long letters filled with news from Pahrump and encouragement for his future. She had returned to Nevada and her job at the boarding house, saving every penny she could for their life after his release. Morrison, the lawyer, visited several times to check on him and ensure he was being treated fairly. Grant, the bounty hunter who had brought him in, stopped by once to tell Maxwell he had done good, standing up and facing his past like a man. Even Sarah wrote a single letter apologizing for her part in the tragedy and wishing him well. But it was Marlowe's letters that kept Maxwell going. Her words became his lifeline, reminding him that this prison sentence was temporary, that a future waited for him beyond these walls. He read each letter so many times that the paper began to fall apart, and he had to carefully store them in a box under his bunk to preserve them. Maxwell became a model prisoner. He worked hard, kept his head down, and stayed out of trouble. The guards noted his good behavior, and the warden took an interest in his case. Maxwell told him about Marlowe, about his plans to marry her when he was released and build a life together in Nevada. "You are one of the lucky ones," the warden told him one day. "Most men come in here with nothing waiting for them on the outside, nothing but more trouble. You have got a woman who loves you and a future worth living for. Do not waste it." "I will not, sir," Maxwell promised. He was released on a cold February morning in 1887, having served his full 2 years with a few months off for good behavior. Marlowe was waiting for him outside the prison gates, and the sight of her nearly brought Maxwell to his knees. She looked even more beautiful than he remembered, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes bright with tears of joy. They came together without words, holding each other as if they could merge into one person. Maxwell buried his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, hardly able to believe this was real, that he was finally free, that she was finally in his arms again. "I missed you," he whispered against her ear. "God, Marlowe, I missed you so much." "I am here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I am here, and I am never leaving your side again." They were married that same day by a justice of the peace in Cheyenne, with Morrison and his wife standing as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate weddings some people had, but to Maxwell it was perfect. When the justice pronounced them husband and wife and told him he could kiss his bride, Maxwell pulled Marlowe close and kissed her with all the love and longing that had built up over 2 years of separation. "Mrs. Xerxes," he said when they finally broke apart, testing out the sound of it. "Marlowe Xerxes." "I like the sound of that," Marlowe said with a radiant smile. They traveled back to Pahrump together, taking their time, stopping at small towns along the way. It was a second honeymoon before they had even started their married life, and Maxwell treasured every moment. They talked about their plans, about the life they would build together. Marlowe had saved enough money for them to rent a small house on the edge of town, and Maxwell had already arranged for a job at the livery stable through letters. Mrs. Pemberton welcomed them back with tears and a feast. She had decorated the boarding house dining room with ribbons and flowers, and all the boarders plus half the town showed up to celebrate their return and marriage. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and Maxwell felt truly happy for the first time in his life. The next few years were good ones. Maxwell worked hard at the livery stable and earned a reputation for his skill with horses. He checked in monthly with the parole officer as required, keeping his nose clean and staying out of trouble. The anger that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a deep contentment that sometimes took him by surprise. Marlowe continued working part-time for Mrs. Pemberton while also pursuing her dream of opening a restaurant. She saved carefully, and Maxwell added what he could from his wages. They lived simply but happily, their small house filled with laughter and love. In the spring of 1889, Marlowe told Maxwell she was pregnant. He had never seen her so radiant as when she shared the news, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. Maxwell felt a fear mixed with joy that took his breath away. He was going to be a father. He was going to have a child, a family, a legacy beyond his past mistakes. "I hope I can be a good father," he said that night, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "I hope I can give our child the life they deserve." "You will be wonderful," Marlowe assured him. "You are kind and patient and loving. You will be exactly the father our child needs." Their son was born in December 1889, a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and his mother's green eyes. They named him Jacob in honor of the friend Maxwell had lost. It was Marlowe's idea, and at first Maxwell resisted, worried it was disrespectful. But Marlowe convinced him it was the opposite. "You loved Jacob," she said. "He was your brother. Naming our son after him is a way of honoring his memory, of keeping him alive in our hearts. It is a way of saying that something good came out of that tragedy, that his name will be carried forward with love instead of sorrow." So Jacob he became, and holding his son for the first time, Maxwell felt a healing he had not known was possible. This tiny, perfect human was a second chance, a new beginning. Maxwell vowed silently that he would be the man his son deserved, that he would raise Jacob to be brave and kind, and better than his father had been. In 1891, when Maxwell's parole period officially ended, they celebrated with another party at the boarding house. Maxwell was truly free now, no longer bound by the legal system, no longer looking over his shoulder. The past would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Marlowe's dream of opening a restaurant came true in 1892. With Mrs. Pemberton's help and a small loan from the local bank, they opened Marlowe's Kitchen on Main Street in Pahrump. It was a modest establishment with only 6 tables, but Marlowe's cooking was legendary, and soon people were coming from surrounding towns just to eat there. Maxwell helped run the restaurant when he was not working at the livery stable, and together they built a successful business. Little Jacob would play in the corner of the kitchen while his mother cooked, and customers loved seeing the happy family working together. In 1894, their daughter was born, a beautiful girl with Maxwell's dark hair and Marlowe's spirit. They named her Grace, because Maxwell said that was what Marlowe had given him. Grace he did not deserve but was grateful for every day. Grace was a lively child who kept them on their toes, and Jacob proved to be a devoted older brother. Mrs. Pemberton retired in 1895 and sold the boarding house to a young couple from California. She spent her remaining years doting on Maxwell and Marlowe's children, becoming the grandmother they otherwise would not have had. When she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1899, the whole town mourned her, but none more than the little family she had helped bring together. The new century came, and with it, new challenges and opportunities. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, with railroads and telegraph lines connecting once isolated communities. Pahrump grew from a small mining town into a more established community, and Marlowe's Kitchen grew with it. They added more tables, hired staff, and eventually bought the building next door to expand. The restaurant became a cornerstone of the community, a place where people gathered not just for food but for fellowship. Maxwell and Marlowe's love story became local legend, the tale of the violent storm that brought them together and the inner storms they had helped each other overcome. Jacob grew into a fine young man, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's business sense. Grace showed talent for cooking and helped in the restaurant from a young age, learning recipes at her mother's side. In 1903, when Jacob was 14 and Grace 12, they welcomed another son, Thomas, named for the bounty hunter who had shown Maxwell unexpected kindness. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1907, Maxwell and Marlowe stood on the porch of their home watching the sunset. Their house was no longer small, having been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. The restaurant was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and they had built a life together that neither of them could have imagined in those early, desperate days. "You ever think about that day?" Marlowe asked, her head resting on Maxwell's shoulder. "The day of the storm." "Every day," Maxwell admitted. "It was the day my life changed, the day I stopped running and started living." "You saved me from that storm," Marlowe said softly. "From the wagon, from being alone, from a future of loneliness and fear." "And you saved me," Maxwell replied, pulling her closer. "From the storms inside me, from the anger and guilt that were destroying me. You gave me peace, Marlowe. You gave me a reason to be better." "We saved each other," Marlowe corrected. "That is how love works, I think. We help each other through the storms, both the ones outside and the ones within." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of gold and pink. From inside the house came the sounds of their children laughing, the normal, beautiful chaos of a family at home. It was a sound Maxwell never got tired of, a reminder of how far he had come from that dark place he had been all those years ago. "I love you, Marlowe Xerxes," Maxwell said, turning to face his wife. Even after 20 years, she still took his breath away. There were lines around her eyes now, silver threads in her hair, but she was more beautiful to him than she had been at 22. "I love you, Maxwell Xerxes," Marlowe replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for running into that storm to save me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving," Maxwell said. "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I had given up on myself." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two people who had found each other in the midst of chaos and built something lasting and true. The Wild West was changing, becoming more civilized, but their love story would be told for generations in Pahrump, Nevada. A testament to the power of redemption and the healing that comes from being truly seen and loved. Inside, their children called for them, and hand in hand, Maxwell and Marlowe went to join their family. The storms of the past were gone, replaced by the gentle rhythm of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a future full of promise. In 1910, Jacob married a local girl and began building his own family. Grace became the head chef at the restaurant, her skills surpassing even her mother's. Thomas showed an aptitude for numbers and began helping manage the restaurant's accounts. Maxwell and Marlowe gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, content to let their children take over while they enjoyed their grandchildren and each other. They traveled some, something they had never had the chance to do in their younger years. They visited San Francisco and Denver, rode the railroad to places they had only heard about. But they always returned to Pahrump, to the town that had given them shelter and community, to the life they had built together. Maxwell never forgot Jacob Mitchell, his lost friend. Every year on the anniversary of that terrible day, He would visit the small cemetery on the edge of town and sit quietly, telling his old friend about his life, about the family that carried his name, about the peace he had finally found. It was a private ritual, one that Marlowe respected but did not intrude upon. Some wounds healed but left scars, and Maxwell's guilt over Jacob's death was one of those scars. It no longer controlled him, but it was part of him, a reminder of who he had been and how far he had come. In 1918, as the world celebrated the end of the Great War in Europe, Maxwell and Marlowe celebrated 50 years since their births and 31 years of marriage. The restaurant threw a massive party, with the whole town invited. Their 3 children were there with their families, 7 grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers, all bearing witness to the legacy of love Maxwell and Marlowe had created. Maxwell, now 61 years old with silver hair and weathered hands, stood to make a toast. The room fell silent, everyone eager to hear from the man who had become a pillar of their community. 31 years ago, a storm hit this town, Maxwell began, his voice still strong despite his age. It was violent and destructive, and it should have killed my wife. But something moved me to run into that storm, to pull her to safety. I did not know then that she would save me in return, that she would calm storms inside me that I had been fighting since I was a boy. He looked at Marlowe, still beautiful to him after all these years, and saw tears in her green eyes. Life is not easy, Maxwell continued. We all carry storms within us, anger and fear and guilt that threaten to tear us apart. But if we are blessed, we find someone who helps us weather those storms, who sees past the darkness to the light that still exists inside. Marlowe has been that person for me. She has been my anchor, my salvation, my reason to be better than I was. And together we built something that will outlast both of us. He raised his glass. To love that heals, to second chances, to the storms that bring us together and the peace we find in each other, and to this town, Pahrump, Nevada, that gave 2 lost souls a place to call home. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Marlowe came to stand beside her husband, and they kissed to more cheers. Their children gathered around them, and their grandchildren, and Maxwell felt a profound gratitude for every moment that had led to this one. That night, after the party was over and the restaurant had been cleaned, Maxwell and Marlowe walked home under a sky full of stars. The desert air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. "Are you happy?" Marlowe asked, a question she had asked many times over the years. "More than I ever thought possible," Maxwell replied, the answer he always gave because it was always true. "You, completely," Marlowe said. "We did good, Maxwell. We built something real and lasting. We turned tragedy into triumph. We found each other in the storm and created calm." They reached their home, the place where they had raised their children and built their life together. As they climbed the porch steps, Maxwell paused to look back at the town, at Marlowe's kitchen still lit up on Main Street, at the church where they had sheltered during that long-ago storm, at the life they had created from nothing but hope and determination. "I would do it all again," he said softly. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every storm, I would do it all again just to end up here with you with this life we built." "So would I," Marlowe agreed, taking his hand. "So would I, my love." They went inside together, closing the door on the night and the past, secure in the knowledge that they had found what so many spend their whole lives searching for: a love that endured, a partnership that strengthened, and peace after the storm. The years continued to pass, gentle and sweet. Maxwell and Marlowe grew old together, watching as Pahrump transformed around them, as their children built their own legacies, as their grandchildren grew and began families of their own. They remained active in the community, beloved figures who embodied the best of what the West could be. In 1925, on a warm summer evening very much like the one when they first met, Maxwell and Marlowe sat on their porch watching the sunset. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies worn but their spirits strong. They held hands as they had for 40 years, fingers intertwined, two lives woven together so completely that it was impossible to see where one ended and the other began. "You remember what you said to me in the church?" Marlowe asked. "That first day during the storm." Maxwell thought back, the memory still vivid despite the decades. "I said a lot of things. You said you did not know how to stop being angry," Marlowe reminded him, "that the anger was always there, burning inside you." "I remember," Maxwell said. "It felt like it would consume me." "Are you still angry?" Marlowe asked. Maxwell considered the question seriously, taking stock of his heart the way he had learned to do over the years. "No," he said finally. "That fire burned out long ago. You helped me extinguish it, replace it with something better. With love and purpose and peace." "Good," Marlowe said, resting her head on his shoulder. "That makes me happy." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set on another day, another year, another chapter of their remarkable life together. The Wild West they had known in their youth was gone, transformed into something more settled, more civilized. But the love they had forged in those wild days remained, as strong and true as ever. That night, Maxwell dreamed of the storm, of running through the rain and wind to save a woman he did not yet know. But this time, when he pulled her to safety, he saw not just Marlowe but everything that would come after. Their wedding, their children, their restaurant, their life. He saw the man he would become, freed from the chains of his past by the love of a remarkable woman. He woke before dawn, as he often did in his old age, and found Marlowe already awake beside him, watching him with those green eyes that still made his heart skip. "Good morning, my love," she said. "Good morning," Maxwell replied, pulling her close. "Thank you." "For what?" Marlowe asked, though she smiled like she knew. "For everything," Maxwell said. "For loving me when I did not deserve it, for believing I could be better, for building this life with me, for calming the storms." "Thank you for saving me," Marlowe countered. "From the wagon, from loneliness, from a life without love. Thank you for being brave enough to face your past and strong enough to build a future." They lay together as the sun rose, flooding their bedroom with warm, golden light. Outside, Pahrump was waking up, another day beginning in the town that had become their home. Their children and grandchildren would come by later, as they did every Sunday, filling the house with noise and life and love. But for now, it was just the two of them, Maxwell and Marlowe, the cowboy and the boarding-house girl who had found each other in a storm and built an empire of love from the wreckage of their pasts. They had survived everything life threw at them, had weathered every storm together, and had emerged stronger for it. It was a good life, Maxwell thought as he held his wife. A life worth living, worth fighting for, worth all the struggles and sacrifices. From the moment he ran into that storm to save her until this very moment, it had all been worth it. And if he could go back and tell his younger self, that angry, lost man drowning in guilt and whiskey, that salvation was coming in the form of a woman with green eyes and an unshakable belief in second chances, he would. He would tell himself to hold on, to keep going, because something beautiful was waiting just beyond the storm. But he did not need to go back. He was here in this moment, with this woman, living the proof that even the darkest storms eventually pass, and that sometimes, if you are very lucky, they bring exactly what you need to finally find your way home. Maxwell and Marlowe lived many more years together, their love story becoming the stuff of legend in Pahrump and beyond. When they finally passed, Within days of each other in 1932, the entire town mourned. They were buried side by side in the cemetery Maxwell had visited so many times to talk to his old friend Jacob, and their shared headstone read simply, "He saved her from the storm. She calmed the storms inside him. Together, they found peace." Their children ensured the restaurant continued, carrying on the legacy their parents had built. The story of Maxwell and Marlowe was passed down through generations, a testament to the transformative power of love, the possibility of redemption, and the strength that comes from facing your demons with someone who refuses to let you fight alone. And sometimes, on stormy summer evenings in Pahrump, Nevada, when the wind howls and the rain pounds down, people swear they can see two figures standing together on Main Street, watching the tempest with their arms around each other, unafraid, because they know that any storm can be weathered as long as you face it together.